Hello and welcome to Coffee and Conversations. I am Leslie Appleton Young, and I am honored to bring you this program from CAR's WomanUP initiative. And I am so excited today to be able to talk to one of my peers, right? One of my very special, amazing women in economics. And Jessica, thank you. Dr. Jessica Lautz from the National Association of Realtors. Jessica, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you. I am super excited to be with you. Honestly, I was really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, it's gonna be absolutely great. And I guarantee it won't be like every other let's just talk about the numbers. And I'm I know our audience is very much in line and familiar with you. I'll just say a couple of things that they may not know, and that is you started at NAR in 2007. It's like I know realtors that started in the business in 2007. I mean, what a roller coaster ride. It's all up from there, right? it was it was crazy. And so you are currently the deputy chief economist, and you're also the vice president of research. So you are involved with all of the activities that were very close to my heart when I was at CAR, which is the survey research, which is the outreach presentations, which is trying to take all of the numbers. And I think you do such a great job with here's news you can use. Here is the analysis, but this is what it means to you. And John Tassilo has this great quote. If nobody's listening, you ain't got nothing to say. And
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'll say about you is people are listening because you are such a great communicator on
Yeah.
difficult topics. So I think you really excel at that. In 2021, you were one of Housing Wire's distinguished women of influence. So congratulations on that. Also recognized by Riz Media, by your peers, and just in terms of checking the boxes, you have quite a few impressive degrees. An undergraduate degree from Central Washington University. You also have a master's in public policy from American University there in DC. And then a little bit later, you got your doctorate in real estate in England at Nottingham Trent University. So a lot of a lot of education and then a lot of experience in the industry. So I want to start not with all of the market stuff we will get to, but just how did you get into economics? What was interesting? What were the bumps along the way? Who helped you? Give us just a little bit of an idea of how Dr. Jessica Lautz today got to be at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, right? So
Yep,
where did
very
I
big
start as a
question.
little tadpole?
Just the highlights.
Highlights reel. Well, I,
Yeah.
I will say, I started really interested in policy, and how I kind of ended up there is I'm from a really small little town in Washington State called Cle Elum.
Yeah.
When I lived there, it was truly a total population of like 1,200 people growing up. So very small. When I went to do my undergrad work, it was just 30 minutes down the road at Central Washington University. And I was working as a research assistant under my professor. And she wanted to research what it meant for a large resort to come into a small town. And I was like, oh, interesting. Well, that
Interesting.
small town was my small town where I grew up. And so
Gosh.
I got firsthand experience in really learning what, oh wow, NIMBYism is, because people from my small town was an old coal mining and logging town. They did not want a fancy resort coming in. They just did not want that at all. And they thought this is going to upend our economy and it's going to bring a lot of rich people in here. And we don't want that. Well, sure, it did, but it also created a lot of jobs. They did end up coming in. And I would like to say that the community has embraced that now, because it really has completely upended what it meant as that community. It's changed the real estate market and the job market. And I loved working on that project, and it got me very involved in policy from there.
Were they able to use the analysis that you presented in the project to kind of help
Yeah.
move things forward at a policy level?
Yeah, I mean, the professor that I was working for, she ended up using it for a paper, and it was the first real survey, truly primary survey research that
Yeah.
I've ever worked on, and it meant so much, and it's taught me a lot too about the entire NIMBYism. And when we think about building in the US and what does that mean? And I reflect back on that experience. I'm not going to date myself too much, but much more than 20 years ago at this point, and thinking about we needed that in that community. They needed something to bring tourism there and to bring people into that area. And it did. But people are very resistant to change.
Yeah, and that hasn't changed,
No.
right? It's, although honestly, there are parts of the country where development is welcomed, and
Mhm.
if you look back on our history, growing up in Southern California, I remember when driving from Long Beach to Disneyland was through orange groves.
Wow.
And then there was a lot of subdivisions and everybody seemed to be okay with it, but
Right.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
path to get there is painful, I think,
yeah.
for a lot of communities. Yeah.
Yeah, and just remembering the way it used to be. So, okay, so
Yeah.
you get your degree, and then do you come back to DC for graduate school at American?
Yeah. Yep,
Okay,
immediately after my undergrad, I drove back in a few days and started school, working 3 jobs that summer, to make my costs work to get across the nation.
wonderful.
And yeah, the cohort that I was in, it was lovely. It was small. It was very challenging. And I will say I probably didn't have the educational background to really be able to stand on 2 feet in an East Coast graduate school.
Right.
But I made it work. And the women who were in that cohort, it was all of about 50 people. And I'm still friends with many of those people. And we're still live in DC and talk about our different specialties that we're in now.
Well, and I think what you learn as you get older is it's lifelong learning.
Yeah.
We all need to keep expanding our data, our
Mhm.
information, and realize some of what we learned back then isn't that useful today. So you go public policy, and then what happens after that? Is that when you transition and get a job at NAR?
No,
Or,
so I worked at a couple nonprofits before that,
okay,
actually in the education sector and then the caregiving sector. And I love those 2 sectors because I think it teaches us a lot. It shows us how people learn. It shows us how people can better themselves, perhaps from where they came from, but also how families support each other. And then when I landed at NAR, it really just became home for me. And I've been here ever since.
right. So you go from those two industries to real estate, and I think we would all agree that real estate is another one of those
Mhm.
parts of the economy that is so positive for people,
Yeah.
right? And that
Yes.
was a big attraction. So, did you had research background enough to get into
Right.
walk into the job at NAR and start doing data and surveys and all of that like out of the box?
I did, yeah. So I had worked when I worked at the other places, I had worked in survey research. And so I
Okay,
came in, I was a pretty junior on the team, but I came in working on the profile of home buyers and sellers and the member profile as a junior member of the team. And I love doing that type of
right.
research. I still do.
Yeah.
I
Right. I
get very
remember you from
excited.
back then because we would
Yeah.
always wait anxiously for the NAR profile of buyers and sellers, right? Because we would use it but in California, it's very different,
Mhm. Right,
So,
absolutely. Yeah,
right.
we're just taking a nationwide shot and
Yeah.
it's not local communities. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So where did the PhD um, germinate in
Yeah.
your career?
Yeah, so I that that was an interesting transition. So I was working here at NAR for a while, and honestly, my sister had come to live with me, and she was a teenager, and I needed to get her off to college. It was something that was quite unexpected that did happen, and my husband then decided to go and get his master's, and I was like, oh, okay, well, we're all just doing this school thing. And it was kind of ruminating in my head that I wanted to do it, but I went and took a presentation that Selma Hepp had originally signed up for at an academic conference.
Oh, I didn't know
But
that. Yeah.
yeah, she had a conflict and couldn't make it. It was here in DC, and I was like, okay, I'll do this. Is super out of my comfort zone, but I'll go and do it. And I walk in, and there's a lot of you'll understand this, Leslie. There's a lot of men, and it was me and my bright colors, and it was a lot of men in blue and black suits and gray suits. And I was like, okay, well, I don't have a PhD, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to try and do this. And so I give the presentation. And I went, whoa. And then I heard the others and I was like, wait a second, what am I doing? I could really go back to and do my doctorate. The
Yeah,
imposter syndrome really getting me there. And
right.
that's when I decided to go and find a program.
Well, I'm just so thrilled that you were able to kind of see that and do that. And did you have support along the way, or did you find, like, I've been pretty open about my experiences in graduate school with economics and just how uninviting and
Yeah.
unfriendly it was towards female voices and things that we were interested in studying, for example.
Oh, absolutely. I have to say that in the process of going to apply, Selma was honestly a great person to talk to, but also talking to the other women that I had done my master's with, and should I go and do this or not? But then when I went and I found a program, I did it out of the UK on purpose. You entered with your master's, you didn't have to redo those classes. You could roll into your PhD work, but also it was a mixed cohort. I was in there with education and social work studies and people
Nice.
who were doing doctorate and legal degrees. And I think that made a difference because being with these
Yes.
professionals who have the work experience, they respected you from the basis. And that was
Right.
great.
Right. That's
So,
great. I'm going to ask Melanie to post the PowerPoint presentation that I did in 2019 at WomenUP, and I think you could relate to some of it. But I was kind of trying to understand why my embrace of the word feminist kind of came from being in a profession that there really were people that could derail your career,
totally.
and could, the whole idea of having a seminar where you stand up and share your insights is often before you even get the title out, they're ripping you to
Mhm.
shreds and all the peer review for the articles and stuff. Whereas in real estate, hey, sky's the limit, and it's majority female, and there are so many successful women. So the whole experience of career was very different, I think.
Totally. Oh, absolutely. And I think working in a trade association too, there's more women working here
Yes.
at NAR too. And it is very different than being in academia where there's not many women there.
No,
No.
there aren't, and I've been following a lot of the freshly minted PhDs on social media and so on, and I have just been incredibly grateful for the career that I had at CAR in economics and research. So we made it one way or the other. So let me start with the market. Everybody's going to say, "Oh, you had Jessica on. What did she have to say about what's going in the market?" So enough from me. Tell us where you see things are and where they're headed.
Well, I mean, I will tell you last week I was on the road and I was told at the end of the presentation that I could probably read obituaries for a living because I was giving such bleak data,
Oh
but
no.
doing it in a nice way.
Yeah,
They said they would enjoy listening to that. But
right, right.
so I'll tell you, I'm not gonna lie. 2023 has been really hard. It's been hard
Yes,
for home buyers, first time home buyers, minority buyers, for single women who are trying to enter. But it's been hard for agents. It's been hard for realtors out there
yes.
because there's just no inventory and rates are really hurting buyers today. What I'll say is we just released a forecast for us at NAR, and for 2024 we do expect it to be better because rates should come down. Inventory, that's going to be a hard one because it's been starting to build and then retracting and then starting to build and retracting, and builders are really having a hard time bringing new inventory into the market with these higher rates too because they have to borrow to build. um, it's very
Right.
difficult for them,
Like the
but hopefully
NIMBYs are bad
24.
enough, but once you get
Yeah.
through that hurdle, it's like you can't afford
No.
to make it work.
No, no, and I mean, I do hope in 2024 we should see a lowering of rates. Our current forecast has it that by the second quarter that rates will be down in the 6% range, and I think that would be a huge relief to buyers out there. and what they can afford to purchase, but also for potential sellers. And that's one of the inventory tightening spots too, because we know if they're in that 2 and 3% range, they may be in a home that doesn't work for them right now, but they're not going to move when it's at 7%, above
No,
7%, touching 8. No,
no, it just doesn't pencil out at all. And there's
no.
so many aspects to the low inventory situation, and
Mhm.
certainly there's a lot of concern about institutional buyers,
Mhm.
but when you look at that as a percentage of the total, it's a blip. It
Yeah.
really has more to do with people staying in their homes so much longer. And I'm wondering if you can
Yes.
kind of share the national numbers on then
Yeah.
versus now in terms of tenure in homes.
Yeah. Yeah. People used to stay put for 6 to 7 years, and now
Right.
they're staying put for 10. And that's become the new norm, is a decade in your home, which is great if you're thinking about the housing equity that they're building, which is about $200,000 nationally. But it's not great when we think about the mobility and what we need to do to really get people moving and bring in first time home buyers.
I'm wondering if NAR will be trying to capture data on inheritance.
Hmm.
I'm just thinking about, hearing anecdotally when I was in California about the boomer owners who essentially were going to gift their homes when they either moved to retire, whatever, made a
Yeah.
change or not, because they knew that their kids could not get into the housing market otherwise. Are you looking at that?
So we do have that as one of the down payment sources is essentially inheritance. It's
Oh,
single
okay.
digits right now. Yeah, it's really small. We just don't see it that significantly. And what's interesting to me too is for first time home buyers and repeat buyers, the number is essentially flat. It's the same share. And I think it's because the median age of repeat buyers is in their 50s. And so they also may be relying on that help too. So thinking about someone who's a Gen Xer or young boomer could be also taking advantage of that. But
Right,
it's
right.
pretty small right now because
Okay.
people are living longer. Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to look at the data. Like people
Mhm.
have these impressions of how things are, and it's like, well, no, actually. And I remember with the institutional buyers, it's like 2% of the sales, right? It's a
Yeah.
very small number, and yet in certain communities, it's big. Is there anything else out there that there's a big misconception about that you might mention?
Yeah, I mean, it was
I mean,
misconceptions, yes. One of them that drives me completely bonkers is I'll open up Instagram or something like that and just try and relax and scroll through reels. And I will see things like the housing market's going to clap and home prices are going to drop. Well, no, they softened some. And especially in California, they absolutely did at the beginning of the year, but they're back on the rise. And so I think if we actually have to look at the data and see that
yeah.
it's just 1% of the market having a distressed sale in the last month. We're really not looking at a large share here.
Right. And softening isn't falling off a cliff,
No, no, it's not.
and if your expectations are 20% a year going forward and it ends up being flat or
Mhm.
single digits or whatever, that doesn't mean the market's bad. It means your expectations were out of whack with reality,
Right, absolutely. I mean, a
right?
quarter of all sales right now still are selling for more than the asking price. That's still a pretty warm market as far as we have for demand.
Right. And what about all cash? Because obviously the increase in
Yeah.
rates is not going to be a problem for the all cash people.
Yeah, I love that you asked this because this is something where for 29% of the market in the last month, they do not care about rates because they just paid it with cash. And
Right.
that's a huge share,
That's a huge number.
29%.
Yeah.
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 So what about our millennials? Like, how are they? Is the data showing that, because I know they were on the rise for
Mhm.
quite some time in terms of market share. Has that turned around?
No, no, I don't have good information here. Here's another bad one. I mean, honestly, the first time home buyer share has been very difficult on a monthly basis. Traditionally, we see it rise in the fall and the winter months because first time home buyers have an opportunity to enter the market. Last month, it dropped to 27%. So we're still seeing first time home buyers struggle. Historically, we should see it closer to 40. So this is pretty bad. We're seeing the age of first time home buyers rise too to the highest we've seen. And so now it's hitting high 30s as opposed to when traditionally we've had a first time buyer come in at 28 to 33.
Right.
So
So the buyers that are actually buying that you're
mm,
measuring in your survey, like, is there a theme for how they're doing it? Is it all mom and dad, or is it saving for 15 years, or what, or all of the above?
I think it's check all the above. I mean, honestly, we are seeing for young buyers who are entering the market. So Gen Zers who are late teens and early 20s, and then also young millennials, they're likely to have family help. But for older buyers who are 35, 36 years old, they don't want family help. That becomes a little uncomfortable. And so they
Right.
are buying in further out areas, looking to more affordable areas, certainly.
So you have a national perspective, which I want to dive into for just a sec, having spent so much time just kind of looking at the uniqueness of of California. But when you look at the country as a whole, how are you seeing the redistribution of sales and
Mhm.
buyers? And is it
Yeah.
all driven by price, jobs, or family? What do you see driving? Because it's real. I mean, we all see it anecdotally, but what do you see in the data?
Yeah, I think this is actually really interesting because I'll go to different parts of the country and they'll be saying, "Oh my goodness, we're having a mass migration flow here." And then I'll go to other parts and they're not seeing it at all. If we look at the Sun Belt, that's where people are moving to. So we've seen people move out, unfortunately, of places that are just too expensive,
Right,
like California and Washington, the coastal areas, and they're moving to the South. And I think what we see in the data, the number one reason to move today is to be close to friends and family. So we know that that's a boomer driven decision of
right,
sellers who are the biggest share, but also affordability of homes, affordability of the cost of living in a place, looking at the job opportunities. All of those are big drivers too.
right, right. I think John and I are this poster child for senior moves to be. I mean, it was interesting that we both had daughters in Atlanta, and Atlanta compared to LA is very affordable, although
Right.
getting less so. When people talk about the crazy California money and too many Californians, and one of our neighbors said, "Oh yeah, the barbarians are at the gate." know,
My
it's
goodness.
like, there's just a lot of a lot of new money and new ideas. What are so it's the South. Any other parts of the country? How's the Midwest doing? The Northern Midwest?
Yeah, so the Midwest, honestly, in some areas people are moving to there, but some areas they're moving from. And I think what we're likely seeing there too is the snowbird effect. I mean, it's probably not super comfortable to live and retire in some of those areas, but also we know that if someone's moving for a good job opportunity, they may be moving elsewhere as well. So it's really hit or miss depending on what city you're looking at in the Midwest.
Okay, so boomers won't live forever.
Mm.
Well, talk to the Rolling Stones, they say they will, but they won't, right? Um, so how long are we gonna have to wait before that they transition out and their housing transitions into to inventory? And you're saying that the inheritance thing is not going to be a major factor. So it sounds like these properties will go on the market. But is that next year or in 30 years, or what do you
Well,
think?
I will say hands down, it can't be next year. So
Right.
the reason why I don't think that at least is
Right.
that in the next about 2 years or so, every single boomer is going to be over the age of 60.
Right.
So if we think about that transition period, that's a really popular time to be thinking about retirement around 60 and to be thinking about where do you want to live next. And so I think it's not going to be in the next couple of years, but we could see it perhaps in the next 10 years that we'll see the
Right.
transition back into young adults.
Because it's a big number, right? This boomer group that the
Right.
poster child for is a big number. So it should have a pretty significant impact, right,
Absolutely.
on the
We
overall
are seeing,
market.
yeah, boomers are the number one generation of buyers today. And so they're really controlling the marketplace today, and they're doing so largely with all cash purchases too. We often
There
see
you
the
go.
multiple offer situations. They're going to win out.
Right.
And so we're seeing the millennials push to the sidelines right now.
Right. I want to just go back to inventory for one
Yeah.
more second because it is a you know, I we've been talking about low inventory for a long time. And so there are a lot of new approaches. I remember reading the middle housing book and thinking, oh my God, this is such a great concept. And at CAR, we've just done a tremendous amount with ADUs. Kendall Young, who's one of our Woman Up cheerleaders, is really focused on that 100%. And I know you've talked about adaptive reuse. Can you talk about some of these things and what you see in terms of the potential for kind of getting a little bit of a break on inventory?
Yeah, and I will say I think every community is different. Each challenge that all communities are running into with a lack of inventory, and it seems to be almost universal across the
Right.
nation, can be different. And so maybe it's ridiculous laws that are on the book, like the number of plants that you have to have for each new build, or maybe it's the number of parking spaces or the density restrictions.
Right.
But ways that people are bringing in these units are not just the office spaces, which are being converted to residential. That's absolutely a popular way to do it or something that's talked about a lot. But
Yeah.
also, what about hotel motels or vacant malls in suburban areas that are not used? Um, a lot of people have decided not to be in nursing homes and to live in a family situation now. What are we going to do with the vacant nursing homes if we have them moving forward?
Oh,
Vacant
interesting.
schools. We know
Yeah.
that birth rates are down. What about vacant schools? So we have to be thinking about this in new and creative ways.
Right. And some of these, I always thought like, boy, these malls have plenty of parking, because
Mhm.
parking is always the big issue. And you kind of hope there really wouldn't be a big NIMBY contingent for a mall, right? That could kind of sneak in because the mall isn't near somebody's swimming pool in their backyard. So
No, it could certainly be for mixed use too. And even if you wanted to keep stores in there, you absolutely could, but that could also be used for residential spaces too. In our own community in the DC area, we've seen a residential mall turn into that. And that's
oh,
a
you
great
have?
use of we have, yeah, it's a great use of space. And we've done case studies on each one of these projects, not the nursing homes yet, but each one of these case studies, because those are out there in local communities. So if you have to argue with your local communities to have these out there, they can be a great example.
Oh, that's really good to know because I know there's a lot written about it and a lot of articles on office space and well, here are the problems with doing this. And, it seems like there's always a lot of potential, but then the negativity comes in. But I think, we've got to kind of fight this on all fronts. So let me ask you this: what's the best case and the worst case scenarios in your view for inventory and what it means for life as we know it, basically.
Well, I want to say we're in the worst case scenario right now, but I don't want to also say that and then learn something else that's gonna the shoe's gonna drop. But right now, when we have about 1 million units in the marketplace and know that we have this huge millennial contingent, the largest share between the ages of 27-ish and 33, where we traditionally see them age into buying a first home at the exact same time that boomers are in the market, I feel like that's the worst case. I
Right.
feel like the best case is local communities and governments understand if they want to attract people, they have to build housing. And so they start thinking about different ways to bring units into the market. And we
Well, is that
suddenly
part
have
of the
this.
problem, though, is that they don't wanna attract people, that it's like the drawbridge is up and stay away or not?
I mean, yes, probably. But I
Mm,
also think if they want to have a viable community, they're going to have to think about who's going to live there.
right, right.
Yeah.
So, for millennials and first-time buyers, typically financing is very important, and you've indicated that rates should be coming down. And then this morning, we got the first advance on GDP in the third quarter. It came in at 4.9, which was stronger than expected. It was also driven by strong consumer spending. And I know you're probably working on the instant reaction right now, but what did you see in that report, and what do you think it means for the Fed when they meet next week. We kind of have assumed they're going to let things ride for a while, but what does this report say to you?
I mean, it's not great, right? So
Right.
we need to tap down on that spending, and that's what they're going to say, I would presume. That being said, hopefully they feel like they've risen rates enough at this point to stop the rise and at least hold it. Um, I also would say that it's the first reading. And so it's possible that it's slightly lower than that, but it's nowhere near close to that 2%. Our expectation is moving into 2024 that we'll hit the 2% range on CPI, but it's not near that low twos that we're looking for, that they're looking
No, but
for.
it's way down from where it
Yeah,
was, right?
right,
So
right.
I read people that say, "Look, let's declare victory and
Yeah,
move on." And I think the letter that NAR was part of a coalition that wrote a
yeah.
letter to Powell, essentially said that, right?
We did, and we said that what we're looking at right now is too long of a period where we were rising rates, and we don't need to be doing that because housing essentially went into a recession. We are currently have substantially less sales than we could at this time period if
Right.
we actually let rates drop from where they currently are. Yeah.
So are you also involved in projecting membership for the National Association of Realtors or
I'm not,
not?
no.
Do
Uh,
you have any thoughts on what could be happening in the future, just looking at the market? I remember
yeah.
we always had like a 2-year lag, like the market would peak and 2 years later membership would peak, the market would bottom and 2 years later membership would bottom, and part of that was our 4-year license and
Mhm.
other things that really didn't have anything to do with the economy.
Right.
But what do you kind of, I'm sure you've thought about it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at membership too, it's been pretty steady at this point, regardless of the housing market. One of the things that I would say too is we also, when we think about membership, it's pretty counterintuitive to the job market. So if the job market is good and you can find a job that is really steady and you know
Good
exactly
point.
what your paycheck's going to be, then we actually know that membership's going to trail off. The other factor that I would throw in there too, that is not part of the forecast, I think that's calculated in, is schools. And we know that our membership at NAR is largely women. And so if schools are shut with the lockdown that we had during the
Right.
pandemic, you're going to see women look outside of 9 to 5 jobs where they have to be in the office every day. And real estate is certainly one of those.
Yeah, the flexibility in real estate, I think, has really just been an incredible attraction for women. So just one more thing, looking at the industry and looking at agents today. I don't know what the exact number is, but
Mhm.
over the last several years, we've had a pretty significant drop in realtor income. If you just look at
Mhm.
the kind of pool
Yeah.
of realtors and the sales going on. So do you have any advice? Are there any like niches that could be exploited? And I mean that in a positive way to help consumers that we're not tapping yet. Are there things that they ought to be thinking kind of outside of the box in terms of kind of surviving during this period?
Yeah, no, it's an incredibly difficult period. So honestly, I would probably pick up and shameless pitch here, the
Yeah.
profile of home buyers and sellers, and find a chart that really speaks to you. And you say, okay, this person is actually buying their home and choosing their neighborhood based on their pet, or they're buying a
Right. I
multi-generational
remember
home.
when you did that. I just absolutely love that. And every pet owner, companion person said, "Oh my God, absolutely."
Well, I mean, we're real, we're out there. And
Right.
so maybe they're choosing it for their pet. Maybe they're choosing it for maybe a more legitimate reason, like a multi-generational house where they need an elderly relative to live. Well, there's probably very few people who know exactly what the housing stock is in your community that can be good for universal design. Pick up whatever you're passionate about in your own life because you're probably going to build a niche on that.
Yeah, I think that's really excellent, excellent advice. And I really was so pleased that you picked up on my segue because, Jessica, I'm glad you caught my intent there with that question because I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about all of the valuable research materials and primary research that you do. at NAR with Lawrence and the whole crew, because it is the source for information about what's going on in the market. And I think it's really imperative that realtors take advantage of it and use it to improve their business. So what do you see as the most helpful helpful venues for people to look at as they look at the NAR site?
Yeah, no, totally. So what I would say the easiest solution for anyone who is interested or remotely interested in NAR research is actually just to follow us on social, because someone may not want to pick up a 150-page report, and I totally get it. Great for insomnia, but not necessarily great for weekend reading. So
Right.
maybe you'll want to follow us on social and you can grab infographics, or you can grab a quick reaction to what's going on in the economy and share that with your consumers. But also, if I'm going to suggest reports, it's going to be our blog as also a good piece of content, because all of the researchers in our group are contributing to that, whether that's commercial or residential, or some other niche. But then the profile of home buyers and sellers, we've talked about that a lot, the member profile and the firm profile. And I would suggest those two, because if you're trying or thinking about being a broker and starting your own business and going independently, that's a good place to look and see what other
Right.
folks are doing, or just to measure up your own company. And then the member profile, just to see how you're doing and perhaps get ideas there too.
Yeah, I think that's all great. And one other thing I'll add that I've always appreciated is the monthly stats, and I think it's the Realtor Confidence Index, or anyway, it was just one sheet where you could see what was going on in terms of all cash, or in terms of back on market, or
Mhm.
was there an appraisal issue. So as the market, and again, it's very local. I'm glad you keep reminding us of that. There may be a bump in the road that's unique to that area. You can maybe get some objectivity objectivity about it. So I've always really appreciated that particular piece as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you to any realtor who takes that survey, because we need your answers to actually put that together. So,
Yes.
and thank you for taking any research survey that you are being sent from us. Definitely plug there.
Absolutely. You are our heroes for taking the time to share your expertise. So before we close out, I've got my rapid fire questions, which are always fun to do. But I did want to ask about one thing that is kind of near and dear to my heart, and that is kind of the power of partnership. And one of my just kind of circling back to the conversation that we started with, I think one of my favorite quotes, and I don't know if it was Sheryl Sandberg or somebody, but the quote was, the most important career decision you make is who you marry, partner with, whatever you want to call it. But that core, if you choose to have one, that core relationship, and in my life, having not had that, and now having that, it is day and night. And I know you've been pretty transparent on social media about your husband and your relationship and the support. And I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that, because I think it's so, none of us do this alone, right?
No, we certainly don't. And I've already mentioned him in this podcast already too. I mean,
Right.
honestly, I have to say he's my biggest supporter, and we met here at NAR. He also worked in the research group, and he was doing research comms and then transitioned out of NAR. But I have to say he's my biggest supporter, and anytime that I need to bounce an idea off of someone, I feel confident that I can turn to him. But I also feel really confident that our cats are going to be fed and taken care of, because I'm not going to do it. So he's really, I have to say, the biggest rock that I have is really him as a partner.
Right. And it's so important for younger people to take that decision very, very seriously. And it's falling in love is a period of, high emotion and bad decisions. And you might want to think that. So that's another thing, Jessica, you and I have in common. And that is that organized real estate has brought us to an amazing partnership with, with someone who's
That's right.
incredibly supportive. So anyway, with that, I want to segue into just some fun fun questions. Don't overthink these, but it's just a little more insight into you. And so the first one, and I've obviously borrowed these liberally from the Actors Studio. So, what is your favorite word
Grit.
and your least favorite?
Gifted.
Ah, nice. Why gifted?
Uh, I don't think that I don't know. I don't like to say that people just have natural talent. I think you have to work for it, and I think you have to practice at what you're really working at.
I love that. It's kind of the mirror image of
Mhm.
grit, right?
Yeah,
Like, don't give up and
absolutely.
do the work. What turns you on?
Intelligence, someone who's engaged and reading and listening to the news. Yeah, intelligence.
Yep. And what turns you off?
Oh, apathy, laziness.
There you go. What profession other than research economics would you like to attempt?
um, Baking, yoga instructor. I don't know. Something mindful, but also delicious.
Sounds great. Okay, looking back on the pandemic, and I do believe in a number of years, we're going to get all sorts of great books that are going to just open the Pandora's box on how it changed us in so many ways. But is there one memory that you have of that period that stands out for you?
Yeah, we really, really had to do a house remodel and we needed an opportunity to be out of our house. So after the lockdowns had happened and it was before the vaccine, but after lockdowns, we rented a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the fall and it
Oh,
was gorgeous. And it was my husband, my sister, our 4 cats, a dog, my sister's dog, and we all went to this cabin and we stayed there for a few weeks and it was glorious,
oh my
honestly. It was
gosh.
really lovely.
Oh my gosh, what an experience. Lovely. Um, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice before starting on your career path, what would it be? What do you wish you'd known then that you know now?
Um, Stop the imposter syndrome and that you belong.
Yes. Do you have a regret?
I don't have too many regrets, but I'm really bad at work-life balance.
To work on
Yeah.
that. So, how do you get going in the morning? I'm always interested in what how people put together the foundation of the rest of their day. So, do you have a morning routine? What works for you?
Grumpily, without talking, my husband and I will either do yoga, Pilates, or Orange Theory.
So,
And
you're not a morning person.
I will get up, I will put the clothes on, but I'm not happy about it.
Okay, got it. I love that. So, okay, that's great. Um, can you tell us about a person that has really impacted you in your life and
Mhm.
why? What did they do for you?
My grandma, actually, she was truly my biggest supporter and really in my corner. We lived with her on and off, but she babysat us a ton, and my brother and I, and she would always push me. I mean, before I started kindergarten, she would grab second grade hand-me-down math books and be like, let's work on this. Let's do this together. And she
Love
didn't have a
that.
college degree. She had a high school diploma. She worked in a bank, but she expected a lot out of me.
You know, that's really good advice for me to hear because my granddaughter is in kindergarten this year, and I did just order a book on table manners. So I'm going to be one of those grandmas, but but I
I love that.
also should do that as well. And then I also got her for Christmas the borrowers because the borrowers made such an impact on me. And I figure, well, she'll be 6. It's 7 to it's going to be fun to do that. But
Yeah.
anyway, we will get to math. I promise. Um, okay, here's the standard question: if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You took long enough.
Great. All right. As we close this out, I'd really be interested in hearing what you read, what you watch, who you listen to. Um, how do you put together the foundation for your life and your career, given that there is content overload in the world? How does that look for you?
Yeah. I mean, I listen to tons of news podcasts on 1.5 speed, honestly, so I can consume a ton. I love The Indicator on Planet Money because it's 10 minutes and it gives you something on the economy every day and something that I may have overlooked or something that's fun. And they often touch on housing. For mindfulness, I actually made this pandemic goal of reading all of the Pulitzer Prize winners in fiction. So I'm somewhere in the 60s at this point. I haven't made it through all 100-ish books at this point, but I'm making my way and it's all fiction and it's great reading that I would have never picked up a book from the 1920s and read before.
I'm glad interesting that you mentioned that because I was in a book club years ago and we did Pulitzer Prize winners. And then at some point we realized that the majority of books that we were reading were written by male
Yes.
alcoholics. And it was just like, and now I think when you look at the Pulitzers in the last 20 years, it looks very different, right? There are a lot of voices, but I'm with you. I mean, I love beautiful writing. I don't read for plot. I don't care what, I read for words. And when you read those books, the words are just,
Yeah.
they just embrace you.
I
So,
did create a spreadsheet though, where I said male author or female author, and I've
yay,
tried to,
good
because
for
it
you.
is pretty brutal.
Good for you. So, just one last question. Is there anything that keeps you up at night? Just looking at, the world and the market and housing and all of that. Is there anything that is, as I said, just a little bit troubling? Are you looking on the bright side and seeing us through this?
I mean, I'm by nature an optimistic person, but I
Yeah.
think there's some really big concerns right now. We have to build more housing for sure. We agents have a very, very valuable role, both buyer and seller agents, to really bring minority and first-time buyers into the market. And so that's something that I'm really thinking about right now.
Yep. You mentioned one of the words you didn't like was apathy, or
Mhm.
that doesn't turn me on either. And I think the housing market needs a lot more engaged um, support, to keep. There's no magic bullet, but lower rates and more inventory would certainly make a
Yeah.
big difference. So, anyway, Jessica, this has been delightful. I appreciate you and what you bring to the industry so much. And I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you better. And thank you for being a good sport with all of these different types of questions that are really reflective of Women Up. We want to talk about the whole picture, and you were just delightful to do that for us.
Oh, I loved this. This was great. What a fun conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, everybody. Really wonderful to have you joining us, and I hope you'll be able to tune in on December 1st for the last coffee and conversations of the year. And stay tuned, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye bye.